My name is Mark Gosson. I'm a senior program manager with Microsoft. And just to give you a tiny bit of background about myself, I came over as part of the acquisition of Opalis 67 years ago, it seems like. It wasn't quite that long, but it seems that way. And so you'll see a lot of orchestrator in this session, and that's kind of one of the reasons I'm involved. And with me on the stage is Matt Carpenter. Say hello, Matt.
Hi, Matt.
Good work. Matt's with Veeam, and he's here to stand there and look pretty and to even out the stage a little, for the most part. So what we're going to talk about today is the Virtual Machine Migration Toolkit. How many of you have heard of that? That don't work for us. A couple of you, actually. All right, that's good. So what we're going to talk about are the guiding principles behind the VMMT. Well, sort of why we chose to build it the way we did, the technologies that are involved, which may explain why Matt's on stage at that point. Will help you identify which customers who have VMware environments that'll be good candidates for conversion, and hopefully you'll be able to talk someone through the steps of what we actually do when this is all over. So that's what we're hoping to get out of this. So I'm not the kind of guy that likes to start with a lot of slides. So slide one is a demo. Wake you guys right up. If I can remember how to get over to my box here. Switching, switched. Very good. All right, so super brief intro. The Virtual Machine Migration Toolkit, we'll get into this in a lot more detail in a second, is a toolkit that's designed to help you basically mass migrate. So if you've got 2 VMs, don't call us. But if you've got 2,000 VMs, this might be for you. So the idea here is I'm going to kick off a couple VMs through a conversion process. You can see there's actually a couple already. We started at the top of the hour, so there's some that are already underway. I'm just going to grab a couple here. So I'll take 4 and 2 and 1. All right, there we go. So you see there, this is just a list of the VMs that are in my environment. I selected a couple of them to add to the queue. And what I need to do then basically to kick this off is set some global values, which I've already done in the interest of time. I'll confirm them here. So you can see there's nothing that's required that's been left blank. Don't worry about any of that. We'll cover all that later. So I'm going to basically start this migration by kicking the Begin Migration button and be hands-off from there out. So I wanted to get these going while you were in the room to get a sense of how long this takes. These are real VMs. There's been some other sessions where people are converting VMs and things that'll fit in a really tiny USB stick. These things are 30 gigs, so they're real. They're chunky. They're beefy. And you can see the conversion has started for those. So we had the 3 that were running there. You can kind of see the progress that we had. And I want to get back. And rather than try and keep that on screen the whole time, we figured the cool way to do this would be to hop over to Twitter. And what we're doing is we've got Orchestrator tweeting out the progress of these VMs as they're converting. So if you follow hashtag VMMT, and I have to apologize to, what was her name? Veronica Mendez, apparently. She's been using VMMT. We're going to flood her box. Sorry, honey. That's just the way it goes.
Oops.
But she'll wonder what all this is about. So you should see here lots of new tweets. Boom, boom, there they are. So number 1 is the one we just kicked off, in case you remember, and 4, so you see them right there. So break out your Twitter client and watch that as we go. I'm not going to leave that up right now, but that'll keep going while we talk. So keep you interested. I know you're going to have your phones out anyway, so enjoy. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about why this toolkit's around, right? So how many of you have tried to move a machine from one hypervisor to another? A couple of you? All right. So there's a couple of difficulties in doing that, challenges, right? And the first one that we came across when we started this project, which was 8 or 9 months ago, is there really weren't any robust offerings that were out there today. There were a lot of tools that were designed to take one machine and move it over, but nothing to do this mass migration thing. So that was the first thing that we were trying to conquer. The other thing is that there's a couple of technical blockers. If you've ever tried to move a machine from VMware to Hyper-V, VMware tools are in the way. And they don't come off easy for some reason. I don't know why that is, but there's a couple other technical blockers, change block tracking, and a few other things here and there that we'll cover. But There's a couple technical blockers that got in our way, but really the big one is this is just time intensive, right? If you do this, it takes a very long time, especially if you're doing it by hand. So what we wanted to do was put together a toolkit that talks to all those problems and addresses them. And so what we have is announcing the Virtual Machine Migration Toolkit. Bang. Wait, Matt, wow. That sucks. The confetti cannons are gone. There was supposed to be confetti cannons. Thank you. All right. Anyway, ta-da! The Virtual Machine Migration Toolkit. Sorry. Next time we'll get confetti cannons. And so really, migrating to Hyper-V is pretty easy when you use this, so just relax. It's not too bad. So let's talk about exactly what the VMMT is. So when we say that it's a toolkit, it's not a product. It's actually a bunch of products that we bolted together to form a solution, right? So the toolkit is designed to help customers get VMs off of VMware and move them to a Hyper-V platform. And it's composed of products that are in market today. So one of the things, we've had this live since January. We've been doing conversions since then. We're about to release our second version next week. So V2 is due out. And what we wanted to do was take stuff that was in the market that would help us do this and just cobble that together into a framework. So we have a couple of tools like Veeam's backup and replication. We have VMM, obviously, and Orchestrator, which I mentioned. And so all together, they kind of work with this web portal that you saw to form a cohesive toolkit. And like I said, it's designed to move lots of VMs easily. So if you're not familiar with who Veeam is, I'm going to pass the virtual mic over here to Matt and let him give you a second or two on Veeam.
So Veeam is an elite VMware partner. So we've worked with VMware since the beginning. That was actually the platform we started with. Just recently, we started going to the Hyper-V support. Basically, been around for a couple years, virtualization specific. And from our perspective, it's all about virtualization. So I guess we're Switzerland in the situation. We don't care if you're on VMware or Hyper-V. In this audience, I guess I would care if I'm on Hyper-V. But really, that's what we're geared around. I don't know if you want to go to the next slide. Mm-hmm. So we have three major products targeted at different segments and different types of companies. The first is Veeam Backup and Replication version 6. That was released end of last year, and that includes VMware support and Hyper-V support. So you can back up and replicate both VMware and Hyper-V. The other one is Veeam One. So Veeam One is a standalone monitoring and reporting tool with business tagging, basically. So there's a piece of that, which is Reporter. So it used to be a bunch of different products. It used to be Veeam Monitor, Veeam Reporter, Veeam Business View. We consolidated it, made a creative name, and said it'll be one. So it's Veeam One. The Reporter product's what we're going to be using in the VMMT. That is an actual way to look at the VMware infrastructure and pull back a bunch of data. So it's very useful in creating that list you saw earlier. The other product is a management pack. So monitoring VMware through Ops Manager. We work with Microsoft, and it's a great fit in there to get more robust metrics.
Okay, so we mentioned already some of the tools that are used in the process, but let's kind of go through that in a little more detail here. So there's a couple of phases to the conversion. The first one is going to be data collection, right? We need to know what's out there that can be converted. And so you have kind of two options at that point, either using Veeam's Reporter or the Map Toolkit version 6.6, which was designed specifically for this task. And what that'll do is bring in all the information from the VMware environment and basically put it into that portal that you saw so that it goes through making a decision process about what VMs are in or out of support based on criteria that exists. And then we're going to go ahead and use Veeam Backup to basically back up that machine. It's more of a copy, but we're going to back it up, and then we're going to go through the conversion process. So the reason that we're using in-market tools is there's a great backup technology out there. We were able to leverage that. And there was already a V2V tool in VMM. So Virtual Machine Manager's V2V tool is what we're going to use to actually do the conversion bits. So we get a copy of it, essentially, and then run a V2V on it. And what makes all that move through the process is Orchestrator. So Orchestrator is making sure that once the data is there, that the Veeam backup finishes, and then we move to the next step, and we move to the next step, and so on. So in the end, this is all around System Center, and it's at the core of all that. So when we started the process, we had a couple of guiding principles that we wanted to make sure that we carried with us. So the first thing is to simplify the conversion. The other is to automate the process. And the third is to design for enterprise. So we'll walk through each of those kind of briefly here. So simplifying the conversion. It's portal-driven, as you saw. It's pretty easy to use. Just click on some stuff, and it kicks off. What you didn't see me do is open Orchestrator, although I will later, or VMM, or backup. So all the tools run headlessly. You don't need to know really anything about them. It's designed to do that without you needing any expertise in those tools, ultimately. So next stage is around automating the process. So we spent a lot of time, in fact, the vast majority of the time that we spent in developing this was around this process, right? So ideally, well, ultimately, we're going to reduce errors and latency by doing this because it's automated. So as soon as step one's done, it goes to step two. There's nobody's in the bathroom, nobody's on vacation kind of thing, right? It's always just going to move forward. It's a one-click conversion. You just saw there. You just hit the go button, and then you watch the tweet feed or the web portal, if you rather. And all the logic that it takes to make that happen has been built into the process, and that's what we'll cover here today, is how all that works. And the last one is that this is designed for enterprise. So this is really built to scale to thousands of VMs and to run unattended. And when we say unattended, you need to select which VMs you want to convert. But the conversion process after that doesn't require your attention. So they run essentially unattended from there. So we need to stop and talk a little bit about kind of the tools that are involved and kind of the contributions from both Microsoft and Veeam. So we've been working with Veeam on this project since the start of it. And there's basically contributions from both sides that form this toolkit. And a couple things I'll say now just to kind of preempt this, because I realize this slide's probably too far back in the deck at this point. But this is something that Microsoft or a partner will provide the setup services for you. So this isn't something that you're able to download yourselves today. It's a toolkit. It's not a product. So I want to get that out there now while you're thinking about that. But what happens here is, the stuff on the Microsoft side we kind of covered: Virtual Machine Manager, Orchestrator, the web portal, and all the runbooks that are associated with that are what we provide in the toolkit. And what Veeam has generously provided is a 6-month license for Reporter, a 6-month license for backup, specifically around the conversions, not just in general, a 90-day eval of NWorks, and there's one master PowerShell script that makes all this work, which they provided as well. So all this together makes the toolkit, right? So there's a part that you need from them, a part you need from us, and you put it all together, and this is a complete solution. Do you want to add anything about plugging the upsell there?
Yeah, with the 6 months licenses, some customers can finish a migration in 6 months. That's great, but sometimes it takes a lot longer. Now it's using our backup and reporter product, and you didn't want the list MSRP for the functionality that we're actually shipping. It's kind of high in cost. So if you go past 6 months, we do offer extensions. So we have special migration purpose license that you can purchase in 6 months increments. Otherwise, you can get a perpetual, which means if I'm going to take a year or two or even 3, because migrations, while we have an automated engine, they're going to take some time with application validation, testing the hypervisor, moving over, just the organization process around it. But we will provide a special licensing through our sales force to extend the life of the migration tool.
You want to talk about NWorks at all?
So there's 90 days of NWorks involved. If you've seen any of the sessions, there's been a lot of talk about our 10-pack also. So if I did want to mention that, while there is a 90-day eval, that would cover an entire environment for looking at the product for 90 days. Also during coexistence, because while you're moving off VMware, you still have VMware. And a lot of customers will move not everything, but maybe half their infrastructure or a portion of it. So we really want you to take a look at the MP. It also gives you a lot of stats based on the environment. If you go to System Center 2012 and you're a net new customer to Veeam, we're also giving away 10 free sockets of the product. Meaning you can have that, you keep it as a year of support included with it, That was a big announcement this week. So worst case scenario, you can download the product and have 10 free sockets. But with the VMMT, you get 90 days to really take a look at it under the hood. And there's a script.
It's a pretty script. So let's talk about what's supported kind of through the conversion process and what is quote-unquote unsupported. So anything that's 2008, whatever flavor of that 2008 that is, whatever service pack, whatever 3264, doesn't matter. It's all good. Windows 2003, SP1 or better is also good. And in the version that we're shipping next week, we have what we're calling experimental Linux support. So everything that we've run so far has been pretty happy. So SUSE sent in Red Hat, and we'll talk a little bit about how that works, but those are all working. We put the unsupported column with an asterisk because when we designed this, we designed it for enterprise, so we weren't really looking at desktop. So there's some desktop stuff that'll probably work all right, Windows 7 and Vista especially, but we didn't really test for it, so we're going to throw it in the it's not a server bucket right now.
And one other thing to mention, we talk about what guests we're moving across, but where are we moving it from? So the system supports ESX 3.5, Update 2, all the way up to the latest release, which is 5.0, Update 1. So one of the things with Veeam being involved is we're always on the cusp and with the new releases. So the system will support that as a source system.
Yeah, well mentioned. So there's a couple of limitations, though it's not too bad. So if you've got any VMs in VMware with IDE virtual hard disks, anybody in that situation? Because generally the only way you get in that situation is you take something from Hyper-V and move it to VMware. So that probably doesn't occur a lot in the wild. So that's the first one, no big deal. VMs in VMware that are using RDMs. Want to talk about that for a second?
So basically that's, the Veeam backup engine works on image-based technology, so it's snapshots. You can't snapshot an RDM, so you can't move it over. So really, I know we say that it's RDMs, but take a look at anything you can't snapshot, like SCSI bus sharing. Basically, if you can't snapshot it, you can't migrate it. So you're looking at something else. Other things that came up is we've had the question, what about I've mounted a disk through an iSCSI target inside the guest operating system? No, that won't work. Basically, because, again, we're looking at that container, encapsulating it, and then moving it over.
Yeah, so the next one on there is static IP info is not automatically configured in the target. So I guess what this says, or sort of implies, but I'll just say it, is if you've got a dynamic, you're using DHCP, that when you get to the other side, that NIC's already there, it's DHCP, there's no problem there. If you're using a static address, when we bring this up in Hyper-V, vCurrent, at least of Hyper-V, doesn't let us go in and inject the new IP, right? There's no interface for that today. So there's no way to do that from our side at the hypervisor level. But what we do is capture all that IP information. So we basically have a text file that's just doing your IP info, and we make that available in the web UI so that if you had to reconfigure it, you know exactly what it was before it started.
Also, with the static IP, we do a NetSH, and we store it in a file as we're doing the migration. So I guess the easiest auto-beta way to do it is after the migration, there's going to be a VMMT file, and just use a NetSH against that after you rename the adapters have changed. It'll go ahead and re-IP it for you. So it's semi-automatic.
Yeah. And the final limitation there is that for virtual disks on the IDE bus, 3 if you've got a DVD CD drive. So that's a V2V limit. Since we're using V2V as our engine to make that conversion happen, we take that limitation with it. So all said, not too bad. So let's talk about who's a good candidate for using the VMMT. And you probably have gotten this already, but if you've got heterogeneous hypervisors, right? So if you've got both Hyper-V and VMware, that's probably a good candidate, or if you're thinking about moving, also a good candidate. If you've got more than 100 VMs. So because there's a bunch of products involved, it does take a couple hours to set up. Like I said, it's not a one-click install. So there's some commitment to time in terms of is it worth it to spend half a day setting this up to move 10 VMs? Not really. But if you've got on a scale of 100 or more that you're moving, you're a pretty good candidate. And we say primarily a Windows workload because the Linux stuff is still experimental. It seems to be working. Once it gets out in the wild, we'll get some more feedback on that. But the Windows stuff we know is rock solid. So those are the people we would think would be good candidates. So let's talk a little bit about technologically what's going on. So there's kind of 3 Uber stages, and then we'll get into these in a good bit more detail as we go on. But in the backup stage, like Matt said, we need to create a copy of the VM. So we do that with Veeam's technology in a way that there's a safety net built in. And I'll let you describe that safety net in more detail so I don't botch it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the big thing we looked at is when you're doing migrations, you don't want to do work on the original production VM. If something would happen during that migration, you've actually messed up your production VM. So basically, we're taking a copy of that. Typically, it's powered off. You can also do some testing when it's powered on, not affect it. But we take a copy of it and put it to the VMM library. Data moving is actually one of the bigger pieces of it, because with Veeam Backup 6, we have 3 different ways we can do it. Either through over the network, we can do SAN mode, which actually does the transfer over the SAN, or we can do hot add, which is a feature of VMware. We can actually put a proxy out there and connect directly to that disk on VMware. That's one of the advantages to this system, is the speed of how quickly you can move data. You don't want to move it all over your actual IP network, so we do give the option for SAN mode to move things quicker. And that's one of the big differentiators. Again, also, you're not actually working on the production VM. Once we do take a copy of it, we use our vPower technology to create an isolated sandbox in which we can do items like gathering the network information, removing tools, doing steps that have to be done to that VM that might be kind of intrusive to the prod VM, but it's all done in a sandbox. So we disconnect the network adapters, make sure everything's okay.
And you see that we're copying that to the VMM library, which is really where we want it to be for the V2V, so it's kind of smart. Move it right where it needs to be to begin with. So we're going to have to back it up once anyway. May as well put it where it needs to be. And then what we're going to do is we're going to mount that copy via NFS and present it back to the VMware environment, because we're going to have to do some things to it. So the next thing that we're going to do is kind of prepare that machine for its V2V, essentially. So the first thing we go out and do is interrogate the machine and just make sure that the OS is what we kind of thought it was, and do some other kind of remedial checks on it. Then we're going to collect the network info. And this is, again, if you have a statically configured IP, we're going to capture all that in the NetSH output and store that for later. Otherwise, just we need to know what that is so that we create the correct configuration during the V2V. And the third and sort of secret sauce magic part of this is actually yanking the VMware tools out of there. So we'll talk about that in a little more detail when we get into the next section of the slides. But that's the part that we need to get done before we start the conversion. And so the conversion is relatively straightforward. This is the same V2V that you would use if you were going through VMM and just clicking on the buttons. So what we do is we have a pretty long command that we send to the V2V in PowerShell that starts all that, tells it which host it's going on, what the networks look like, how many CPUs, how much RAM, blah, blah, blah. All that gets stuffed in there. And then we just clean up after ourselves. So all the stuff that was created in the process, the stuff that's in the VMM library, we clean out all of that stuff. And then when we're done, you should have 2 VMs, the source, which has never been modified, and this new copy that's in Hyper-V. So that's the kind of the high level of the stages, and we'll dig a little bit deeper here in how this works. So the very first thing we said was we need to go out to vCenter and figure out what's in that environment. So like I said, we can do that using map, or we can use it reporter. And what we've done is we've had the VMMT accept data from either, and we just basically normalize that for what we want to accept back. And we take that and we store it in a series of databases that we're running the VMMT through. So once we've got all that data available, that'll populate your web page, which is groovy. And then from there, you pick out the ones that you want to transfer, or migrate ultimately, but stage 1 is to transfer them. So the copy command gets sent across using Veeam. And as I said, it ends up in the VMM library. So this is that optimized copy that gets sent out there while the original is still left untouched. So what we end up with is a VMDK sitting in the VMM library. Anything to add?
No, I think that's about it.
Good. So the next thing we want to do is mount the NFS. And so, again, this is kind of really cool when you think about it, is we're taking the VMM library and we're making that an NFS share and mounting that back to VMware. So this is Veeam magic.
And this is one of the vPower technologies. So We have instant recovery within our backup product. It uses some of the same technology where we stream a machine from one of our backup archives. Basically, the sandbox we use for that, it's an NFS mount, and we're multi-homing the VMM library and our VMMT repository that mounts that in the same location, so it's dual functionality. Provision it back to the environment. The host that we're actually utilizing as a sandbox sees it, and now we can work on it. So we can power it on, work with it. But really what's the enabling technology we created about 2 years ago, we said it's going to be a great enabling technology, vPower. But since then, we've had a lot of utilities that have used it, and it was a great functionality for this project.
Yep, it's very neat. So then we're going to do some inventory. So the stage 3 is to go out and query that newly mounted VM. And like I said, we need to gather some info about it. And we're going to find, among other things, the VMX. Whoops. And so this is just, again, the informational gathering stage of this. There's not a whole lot going on in terms of I/O or anything. We're just querying some stuff. And then what we're going to do is configure a VLab or a sandbox. So that new VM that's over there gets started up. We mount that VMDK to it, and we don't plug it in, obviously, right? Because you get a conflict. So the sandbox is not networked, but because of the way that VMware lets you access the guests from the host, we can actually go and do stuff on it, which is pretty neat. So we're going to go in through there, make sure it's not networked, and be able to get the things that we want done. And if you're following the tweet feed, Server 4 is in that stage right now. Server 1 is in the stage after this. Anything to add?
No.
All right. So network and uninstall. This is where we gather the network info, make sure that we've got everything that we need. We save that off to a file, and then uninstall the VMware tools. And this is the really kind of tricky part, because the way that we're uninstalling the VMware tools is basically through vCenter's ability to access the guest through the host, which is via VMware tools. And we're uninstalling the thing that let us in, right? So you can imagine what happens when that works. We've uninstalled the thing that let us in, and we basically have to issue a shutdown at that point and just kind of run and hope that it worked, because we're cutting off our way back in at that point. And it does work surprisingly well.
One of the things to go over on the network piece, so we are gathering the network adapter information. So we're knowing what it's connected to. So we have a relationship table that says, on the Hyper-V side, this is network A. On the VMware side, this is that same network. We're making sure when it gets put to Hyper-V, it's connected in the right places. Also, with version 2, we do VLAN tagging, so we actually move over that information, which one of the things to look at is on VMware, VLAN information is stored in the switch. Hyper-V, it's on the adapter. So we're doing some translation for you to get that over. Also, we can retain a MAC address, so if you have MAC-based security or some type of application that utilizes that, it will have the same adapter, the same MAC address, and the same VLAN tag if you so desire once it gets to Hyper-V.
And that takes us to the V2V, which is basically the last stage here. So we're going to, like I said, issue a really detailed V2V command to Virtual Machine Manager, and it's going to take the VMDK out of the VMM library, run it through the V2V process. What you end up with, obviously, is a VHD at that point, and then get rid of the source. So we should have a clean system with 2 VMs at that point. The source is in whatever condition it was when you started. So if it was running when you started, which is possible, it'll still be running, and the other one will not be running. So the target on Hyper-V will not. If the source was stopped, it'll still be stopped. But we don't start the Hyper-V VM for you. You can configure that if you wanted, but we're just playing it safe. So we stop there.
It's definitely a choice. So you do have to shut the production VM down before the migration to actually make sure the data is consistent. We don't defy physics. We can't apply delta data across hypervisors. That would be really cool, but it's not available in today's technology. The other thing is if you have a stateless machine, like maybe a notable web server, those you can just move across. So that's a really nice flip over with no downtime. The biggest thing is minimizing the downtime for a lot of VMs to migrate over to Hyper-V, and also saving that. Now, we do have a lot of Palace workflows or Orchestrator now. That means I'm not working for Microsoft because I keep using the old names. we have a lot of workflows that you can actually add on to. So if you wanted to go through and say, shut down the VM, power on the new VM, you could definitely do that.
Yeah, we've got a slide on just that topic. So we're going to jump into the demo that we started earlier, and we'll be a little more thorough this time. So let me jump back to 3. Blink, 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 blink. Nice. All right, so you can see there that 1 and 4 were the 2 VMs that we kicked off earlier. You can see they're progressing along nicely. Those of you that are in the tweet feed have probably seen that as well. So what I want to do is I want to walk you through the basic setup here. So if you had a clean environment, right? So the first thing that we need to do is we need to gather some information from you. And so there's this page here that asks for a couple of values that Orchestrator needs and then a couple of global VMMT settings that you provide. So on the Orchestrator side, we need to know whether you're using map or reporter, essentially. So you type one word or the other. Pretty easy. Where your log directory is, this is kind of up to you. Just you need to supply it. So there's a share out there to store all of our logging in. And if you're a map user, we also need to know where the map database is located and what the IP or the FQDN of the production VC is. So you provide that. And the last thing, of course, is going to be the SQL instance, because this is all database-driven, obviously. Now, on the global settings, we're going to need to know some things, and I guess these are going to be pretty obvious, like where the VMM server is, the FQDN of that, where the library share is, where your Veeam backup server is, where the backup repository is, which VC you want to use for your sandbox and your ESX host, where your resource pool is. And then there's 2 things that are in there around a test utility that we have baked into this just to make sure that stuff is working, because there are a lot of parts. So with all that done, you would essentially run the test utility, which I'm not going to do here because you see that it worked last time I did it. And this just makes sure that all the bits are where they need to be, that the NFS is mounted properly, all that kind of stuff gets worked out. So I'm not going to worry too much about it. It's just there as a safeguard. So if you're wondering how we get data out of those machines, well, we need to know some info around the local account info for the machine, because when it's in that sandbox, it's not connected to its domain, right? So we need local account privileges to go and ask it for its IP and all that. We need to know, or we need to have access to the sandbox ESX host, so that's what the root there is for. And then, what's the other one? The vCenter itself. So vCenter, ESX host, and then the guest info is what we're there for. And this is done using a secured XML file. So we're just presenting it here to make sure that you think you've got it right. You can always go back out to the setup file and make sure that.
And one thing to note on the root credentials, every time we say we need root credentials for ESX host, everybody goes, no.
Yeah.
Oh, no, absolutely not. So the sandbox VM that we're using to actually mount to and create that sandbox, it can be something in your infrastructure, or it can be a newly created VM that's added to vCenter, ESX host that's added to vCenter. So you can have one that's isolated that you know that password to, and it won't affect the rest of your environment. So it's just one host for that. Everything else is based on VC credentials and individual guest OS credentials.
Right, so the next thing you need to tell us is some names. So there's networks on the VMware side, there's networks on the VMM Hyper-V side. You need to tell us which one lines up with what. We don't have any way of knowing that. So you basically just fill it in here and say, CorpNet on that side equals CorpNet on the side, or whatever it happens to be. So I'm sending everything to my iSCSI network so that, just for my own reasons, but you configure that as you see fit. And then one of the things that we need to figure out before we uninstall your VMware tools is what version of the tools are you running. So you see there's a version, a GUID, and a guest ID. And you see it's a fairly good size list here, but you can add to it if you need to or modify it. And what happens is if you run through the process and for some reason you have a custom build or a version that's not on here, the logs will actually tell you, hey, you've got this version on this OS, and you basically need to go out and either track down the GUID, which is in the registry. We give you instructions on how to do that. Or in the case of a Linux VM, you're going to need to construct something that looks like the bottom 3 or nearly the bottom 3 there, where we're doing an uninstall of the tools and then a shutdown of the machine. So you see they're all the same right now, so it's been pretty consistent across the Linux VMs.
And also, there are some cases in which you can't uninstall VMware tools to the manual process. So we try to get as many of them as possible. But in the case where you can't, it really has a restart option. So it comes back and says it wasn't uninstalled. There's a way we can actually say, stop here. It sits in the sandbox. You can power it on manually, remove tools, power it down, and then move through the process. So we really have you covered in case they just want to be really pesky and not come out.
Yeah, because the big phase here, or well, the two big phases is the V2V and the copy, right? So since you've already done the copy, we figure you can keep it. There's nothing wrong with it. We just need to figure out what that version is. So restartability through Orchestrator is one of the neat things that we provide. We can go out and collect host information from your VMM servers. So the hosts that are out there, you see I've got two. You select which one you want to send these to, and you can see based on storage and CPU at the time you refresh this anyway, where you want to send those. So pretty straightforward. You just need to tell us where you want that to go. And you can change this on the fly. So if I were to switch these to 27 now, the other machines would end up on 27 instead of 6. So once you've got all that configured, then we basically need to go out to vCenter and suck down all that data so we know what VMs you have and which ones are supported or not. And that's what this stage would do. You see there we're using Reporter as the source right now. And I basically just hit the collect button, and I've already collected today, so we really shouldn't have any real delta there. But a couple seconds, that'll refresh us over to the list page where we would go through and select which VMs are which. So 15 seconds seems like a long time sometimes. All right, there we go. So there's our VM master list. And at this point, you can see that they're sorted by name and support. So you can see there I've got a sent box that's supported, and on the second page there's some Red Hat and a SUSE box and all that. So you can see that they're all supported. The template is not supported because, duh, right? But I mean, we've got logic to check for that, which is good. And you see this box VMMT23. That is one of the machines that it's in the process of being converted, so we don't want to convert that in case you didn't know what that was. Don't touch that one, so we're not supporting it. And then the Windows 7 box, like I said, at this point we're flagging those as unsupported because it's not a desktop OS. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you can alter that supported value and run it through if you want. Sure.
Initially, we have gone through and done some quick touch and go testing on the operating systems. They will migrate over. It's just we haven't done extensive testing on it, just because we were really focused on the servers.
All right, so I'm going to grab a couple more here. Select a couple VMs. And now I need to set some global values. And I've already done this for all of them, but I'll just show you what we're talking about here. So the guest group is the group that you assign in that secure setup file to say this is the account info for the local credentials on that box. The allowed time is how long we wait for stuff to shut down. So there's a bunch of shutdowns that have to happen during the process, and depending on how quick or slow your virtual or your vCenter is, you might want to raise or lower that value. We set it at 10 by default. I can go to 8 quite safely, so I'll do that. Minutes, I'm sorry. Yeah, minutes. You can also set a couple other options in here. So there's Force Tools Upgrade, Allow Restart, Keep Mac, and Use VLAN. Force Tools Upgrade may not be clear from the name, but what it does is if you're in a mixed environment in terms of versions on the vCenter side, it'll force that VM up to the most current version and then uninstall it. And there's a reason for that. But yeah, so if you need to, you can have that. We allow restart by default. So like I said, if somebody turns something off midway through and the conversion doesn't get all the way done or the migration, you can just restart it where it stopped last. And then Keep Mac and Use VLAN hopefully are fairly obvious to you. So we'll pass that data along to the next guy. So I'm going to save that. And then this is just to kind of confirm that that's all right, especially if for some reason I didn't mean to collect 09 there, my IIS server, so I'm going to edit that and get rid of him. And if like I said, if for some reason the default group for this server was different, you could go and modify that individually here. So that's all that's for. And then we're at the point where you saw in the beginning of the show where I hit the Begin Migration button. So I can hit the Begin Migration button and begin that, or we can make you hit the Begin Migration button. How could this be, Matt? This is not as crazy. They can't hit the button. There's too many of them. But if you tweet a particular string that maybe we're watching for, so if I pop over to Orchestrator, I'll show you what I mean. So I've built this out in Orchestrator. I'll make it a little bigger for you. And this is basically going to kick off the process when we get 20 tweets to hashtag MMS B316. So let me switch back to the feed stream. Apparently, we're not the only session that had exactly that stream, so you've got a little bit of a head start. But look at that 51 new. Woo! Look at them all. All right, so we wanted MMS B316, right? All right, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them out there. We need 15 more or so before this will kick off. So Matt and I can wait. Get tweeting.
How was your weekend?
What's that?
How was your weekend?
Oh, my weekend was good. Went to the Bellagio last night. Good buffet.
We can really wait all day, guys.
Yeah. Oh,
I think there's one.
There's one?
No. We're going to be here for a while.
There's one.
One new tweet. What is it?
I don't trust these guys.
I don't either. At least we don't have to do anything really right now.
That's a good one.
Does anybody got their devices out?
Really?
All right, there's two.
Man, I should lower the threshold.
We should have gone with 5. People aren't awake. It's Thursday. Too early.
Yep.
This is going to take a while.
All right, the two of you who tweeted better do it 10 more times.
Everybody else is
or
kind of
5 each.
slacking.
Well, we already had a couple, so it's a good
Yeah,
thing.
we give them a head start.
You want to see what they said?
3.
Oh, all right.
So the same 2 said, I'll do one more.
Let's see what they said.
These guys.
They started to get on with the demo.
These guys are really annoying.
Oh. All right.
What did they say?
They said, "Want to get the show started." Let me see. I might need to lower this threshold to, what do we got there? Oh, that's good. 1, 2,
2 more.
6, 7, 8. I'll move it to 10. How's that? I'll restart this at 10.
It's kind of sad.
How many more do we need? You might have to help us out.
All right.
These guys, I don't trust these guys.
I'll send a couple.
Oh, there we go. Did I count that right? Is that 10? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think we're there. Not sure that's the correct spelling of that word, but I'm not going to correct it. My head doesn't weigh anywhere near 40 pounds. So let's see. Uh-oh. All right, so the tweet IP gave me a little error there, but it looks like it tried to start. So let's go, whoopsie, wrong way, in here, and let's go right to results and see if they showed up. 6, 7, and 8 are the ones we're looking for. Gazinga. Tweet fired VM conversion, ladies and gentlemen. You pushed the button. Well, 4 of you did. The rest of you, Okay, so we've got about a half an hour left, so I'm going to spend a little more time talking about what you see here. So this is kind of the high-level page, as you can kind of tell. There's logging turned on, and it's built in, so if I wanted to see how well that conversion went, I can pop right into the log, which is super fun. But what I also can do is check on the job data. So the 3 that we just started, give them a minute or 2 and they'll show up in here. But what we have here is the kind of a real-time view of the backups that are going on. All the ones that we've done this morning have already gone through successfully. Sorry, I lied. They're 16 gigs. They're not 20, but they're real VMs. And you can see there we got average throughput of 41 megs a second, 59, 35, and it bounced around a little, and how long each of those took. So when the other ones were to start up, if you're the kind of guy that likes to, watch paint dry, you can come in here and watch that stuff. It's right there to see.
And all this data that was shown in the results pane has been populated via PowerShell. So the Veeam backup product does have a PowerShell interface where you can create jobs, start jobs, look at data. But we've just gone through and said, here's the data we need during these jobs. Put them in a SQL database. We've also queried the repository, which is the target for a backup or a copy. So we're looking to make sure, do I have enough data? So before the backup occurs, we say, how big is the VM? How much space do I have left? So you don't actually overcommit the space on your sandbox. But we're going to give you that data, show it you here, and then keep updating it. It's also good because you can get like a leaderboard of how fast your migrations are actually moving.
We talked about for the next version, we'll have an online leaderboard so you can see how your conversion speed measures up to other people's conversion speed.
Achievement unlocked.
Yes, achievement unlocked. So, well, we'll see that live conversion there in a second. It hasn't quite hit yet. And I want to go through a couple other things. So you've got your recent conversions, the ones that are completed. If you had any that failed, they'd show up there. And you can look at them all. We also have a report card, which shows you how many you have, which is the darker blue there. The green ones are how many are finished. If there were errors, they'd be yellow. So Pac-Man's opening his mouth slowly here. We also average out the average time to migrate, average copy speed, and average VM size. So I've got 44 VMs in my environment. 3 of them weren't supported. So that's all the math there. One of the things I did want to point out here, which will become more apparent when I drop into Orchestrator, is in the results window, you may have noticed that some of the VMs have a value in minutes, and then there's a minutes queued after that. And the reason for that is if you stuff more data than we're ready to handle in terms of VM conversions, the way that we've designed these runbooks is to basically take them and just hold them off, right? And so the time that they're held off, we record as well, so that you can show your boss, hey, that took 54 minutes, but 13 of that it wasn't doing anything. So technically that doesn't really count. So we show you what the total was, but you can subtract out that data if you really wanted to. And it looks like the migration jobs are starting, so we should have, yep, you can see they're starting up in there anyway, so that's cool. And then under tools, we talked about the NIC info. So you can pick which virtual machine you want to see that you've converted, and let me see, who's done? I should have flushed that table before we started. 11's done, so let's go look at 11. And that's the IP data that came back. So I am using DHCP, so no worries there, but that's the data that we give you back. If for some reason, like Matt said, if you had a job that got stuck, if you misconfigured something, typed something wrong, the server went down or whatever, you have the ability to restart jobs there. And if for whatever reason you need to remove a VM from the list, you can remove it from here. So, I mean, the web UI is pretty simple, straightforward, and easy to use. We like it. Now I wanted to take a minute or two and show you kind of how this is actually working on the other side. Let's see, do we have any B2Bs going? Oh, it just finished. Cool. So you can see that we got a machine that came over. This is a little glitch we're getting in VMM at the moment, saying that it wasn't able to set the memory and CPU exactly right, although it has for some reason. We're getting that error. Not worried about it right now. Let's go back and look at Orchestrator. So there was our tweet bot. You see there it ran successfully and started our VM, which was really cool. But let's go look at VMM itself, or VMMT, sorry. So there's a couple of ancillary jobs that are in here around the test utility, host collection, the VM collection, and refreshing the secure setup info. So these are all jobs that are pretty straightforward. I mean, you look at these and there's not a lot of questions there, right? You see that we're starting it, we're clearing out something from the database, and then we're running a command. It works or it doesn't work. And that's kind of the model for all these. When we actually kick off the conversion process, or the migration, this is all, like I said, database driven. So if you've used Orchestrator before, how many of you have run into Orchestrator, used it a little bit, or went to the labs, any of that? A couple of you, okay. So Go Orchestrator. So Orchestrator is great for this for a bunch of reasons. And the one that Matt mentioned earlier is the one I'm going to come back to, which is extensibility. So, could we have created a monster PowerShell script on our side to kick off the one that Veeam provides? Yeah, probably. Would it have been as elegant? No. And would it be as extensible? No. And could I have dropped the tweet IP into it? Definitely not. So, thank God for that. So what we're doing here is we're just going out to the database and pulling out the VMs that you've just selected. We write some data back to them to initialize their records. If there's a delay in starting them, which some people have asked for, it'll actually hold off on the delay. And then it starts them off into this global queue. So the global queue is set out at 20, which is just a number that Matt and I have come up with through testing and playing with this over and over, that this is kind of a safe number. So if you select 35 VMs and push them in, 20 will go through basically and show up in that list of here's the 20 that we're going to convert. And this is the queue that they're going to sit in while they wait. So the first two will pop out of this queue and start, and the rest are going to kind of sit in here. And you see there's a loop waiting, just checking to see whether or not it's clear to leave the queue. And once they get into the conversion, you can see we've got one running right there, live. This is where they go. And so each of these jobs, if you're familiar with Orchestrator, what we've done is we've clamped them down so that this will run 2 concurrent jobs, but no more. And again, that's done through testing and speed and performance. If you send 4 backup jobs through, it's not going to go any faster than 2. So we're capping this at 2, and the others just queue up. And like I said, this is all done automatically. This is just to further edify you and let you help understand how this is all going. So you see a lot of different, well, I should say, you see a lot of the same icon here, the 3 boxes with the little green arrow there. So if you're not familiar with Orchestrator, what that is essentially the icon for a go-to or a go-sub, depending on how you've configured it. And when we designed Orchestrator, the runbooks, I made sure to make this completely modular. And so what happens is when we start the stage, that's basically a database update to say, hey, we're entering this stage, whatever stage we're in, 2.2 here, and this VM name, blah, 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 start time, end time. So rather than putting that into this runbook, what we have is a change management path, and at the beginning of every stage, we run through this runbook. So when it hits that, the 3 squares in the triangle, it jumps down to this runbook. And you can see there, the normal path is to gather the data, so that's record stage start, and I'll just show you what's in there in case you're curious. So the data that we're passing in is the log details that we want to record in the log, the VM name, the job ID, restart location, status, stage, and a web summary for the UI, the web UI. And then what happens is we write the log file back to that share, we update the database, and now there's a little blue bird in there, which we added the other day for tweeting. So that's extensibility. So by adding it here, I don't have to add it to all the stages. I know that all the stages are going to write through this, and so as they write through this, they get tweeted.
Which is not in the GA version.
Yeah, we'll probably pull that out before we pack it up. But what we won't pull out is that grayed out version at the end there. So this is the reason for doing this isn't the tweeting so much. It's in your environment, when MCS or a partner comes in and helps you set this up, what you might want to do is, I don't know, it's the change management folder. Maybe we're going to have some change management around this. Seems like a good idea. We're moving a VM from one side to the other. Right, so whatever your change management system is, whether that's Service Manager or Remedy or whatever it happens to be, we can plug that in right here, and now the VMMT is extended into Service Manager or Remedy or whatever it is you're using. That's the power of Orchestrator anyway, so we're just leveraging that here. We also have a stage update and a stage end, and kind of the reason for separating those is change management. We could have just run everything through one, but if you're doing I need to create a ticket, that's different than I need to update a ticket, which is different than I want to close a ticket. So we broke it out just for that reason. There's also incident management, which is this is the flame out path if something goes wrong. We actually have to do a bit of cleanup here, but again, we want to leave you the ability to say, hey, I want to cut a ticket for this, that something went wrong, so I want to create an incident around that ID. So anyway, sorry, enough about extensibility. Let's go back to the engine. So you can see that this kind of framework is going to be consistent across all of these runbooks. So we're going to take information in the start, we're going to log it out, going to do whatever this runbook does, which is generally one object kicking off the master script. There's an error path, and then there's a success path. It's really as easy as that. So inventory VM is next. Looks pretty much similar. And this time we were separating error and warning for our own devious purposes. And then the next stage is where we actually start the VM, or sorry, the stage after this is the one where we're going to start the VM in the sandbox. And so we don't want to put too much resource use on that ESX host because we found from the customers that we've been dealing with that there isn't a lot of spare. So there's another queue that gets put right here. And from here to the end of these stages, the 2.x stages, we don't want more than 2 going through here. So if you sent 20 through and 20 get to this stage, their 18 are going to queue up again here while those 2 run through. And again, this is for performance reasons and based on our experience in testing. So from there, this is probably the most complicated workflow we have. We're going to start the virtual machine up. You see there's a couple of error paths and a couple success paths. And that depends on whether or not we find tools installed. So if for some reason you had a VM running in VMware that didn't have tools on it, well, we're not going to be able to get info out of it, for one, so we have to treat it a little differently. And if not, then we go ahead and go through the normal process. So you see there's a slight variation in what we do there.
And this is also for if you can't get tools out through the automated process, for that percentage, it'll go through and say, I couldn't get it out. If you manually take it out, it'll go through this stage again. And that's where it says, oh, now you don't have tools. I'm going to go down through this path.
Exactly. And then the last of the in-guest tasks are going to revolve around getting the info out and actually getting rid of VMware tools. Right, so from there, we're going to jump into the V2V. First thing we do is move this from the VMM library into the VMMT repository. They're next to each other, so this is just basically, it's not an actual copy, it's just a file table change. And then this is where, all the real work happens, which is the V2V. So again, it doesn't look like much. It just looks like we're calling a bunch of multicolored squares out. But the ESX to Hyper-V, in case you're curious, these all look the same too on the inside. We're calling the master script. Make this a little bigger for you. So try to make this legible. So the script is designed to be pretty simple to use. So the PowerShell path is sourced out where we're calling master, which we could probably also variabilize. I don't want people changing that. The data source being SQL, which table in the database, and the job ID all being passed in dynamically. And then the task within this particular PowerShell script that we're running is ESX to Hyper-V. So if we looked at another one, it might be there'll just be a different task, but the stuff leading up to it will all be the same. So it's very uniform in its design.
And one thing to note there, it said PowerShell 64. Orchestrator natively runs 32-bit. It doesn't run 64, so we had to do some black magic, I'll call it.
Fancy footwork with the PowerShell.
To basically start the PowerShell on the 64-bit runtime and then run the script. So that's just a variable for a very long string with a lot of pipes that say PowerShell 64. Also, the backup product, the PowerShell interface for backup, is a 64-bit PowerShell interface, just like VMM.
Yep. And so the last phase, as we said, was just a cleanup. So this is really just going around lowering the counters, because as you come into the queue, you raise a counter. As you leave the queue, you've got to lower the counter. Cleaning up the stuff that's on the disk, and then some database writes, folder deletes, as you can see there. Not especially complicated, but that's what we're after. So we're down around the 10-minute mark. Just another slide or two. I wanted to leave some time for Q&A, because I imagine there will be some. And 3 more. Look at that. Exciting. All right. So you start. Oh, see, I had a whole slide for that, so that you would. If I had put the slide up, I bet we would have got more.
Probably not.
Yeah. So again, the reasons for Orchestrator in this environment was the modular runbooks, the interchangeable components, and that it's easy to customize. So you saw the modularity of those runbooks. Interchangeable components is really around the idea, did you use map to get that data, or did you use reporter? So it's easy to look at that, make a switch, and do that in Orchestrator. And of course, it's easy to customize. So when it gets to your environment and you want to create a ticket or send a tweet or flood someone's inbox, whatever, you can customize it to do that. So a couple of important points here to go back through. If you are interested in this, contact your Microsoft sales rep. Because as we said, this is something that, being a toolkit and not a tool, this isn't something that's just available to the public. So it requires the use of either one of our trained partners or MCS, whichever you prefer. And right now, today, the program's currently limited to these countries. So US and Canada, Germany, UK, and Australia. And over time, we're going to try and get more in there. But as of this session, on this day, that's where we're at. Yeah. If you're watching this on tape 3 years from now, hopefully there's a whole lot more than that. Also, hello, future. So yeah, in review, we went through why we built this the way we did, the technologies that were in use. Hopefully you remember all that. And remember who's a good customer. So generally Windows-centric environments, but we do have Linux support. If you've got more than 100 VMs and if you're thinking about switching hypervisors or have already started, you're maybe a good candidate. And the steps, hopefully you'll remember those, but that's how we're technically getting all this done. So I want to leave a minute or two for Q&A. Hopefully there is some. Otherwise, we'll finish a few minutes early. But questions?
And if you do have a question, just go up
or
to
just
the
tweet
microphones. Yeah, just tweet them. We'll watch the stream. Walk up to the microphones.
Keep
so
your
it can be heard.
questions to 140 characters or less. There we go.
What if you have a virtual machine with more than 4 disks? How do you get that over?
So, if you do have more than 4 disks, there's a couple ways to attain that. If the machine is off, basically it'll take the first 4 disks and move it across. Okay. At that point in time, you could probably, if it's a data disk, you could do a VMDK to VHD conversion. We've seen people do it through PowerShell, because within the VMM PowerShell, you can do that conversion, and then attach it to a SCSI bus. Okay. But basically, when it goes across, it says, you're SCSI, now you're IDE, and we can only have 4. But it is possible.
Other questions? Really? We've been so thorough, or they're so busy tweeting, I don't know which it is.
Or they're not awake.
All right, well, if there are no questions, if you're shy and you want to come and talk to us, come up and talk to us. Otherwise, you get about 5 minutes back. Make sure that you complete your session evaluations. And have a good day.